Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. We're excited to hear from AnglePoint's experts as they discuss the importance of ITAM when it comes to data security. Before we get started into the webinar, I want to make a few quick announcements. First, this webinar is being recorded and we will share the recording and an in-depth article with you via email following the webinar. Second, we strongly encourage that you participate and ask questions throughout the webinar. Please type them into the chat box or Q&A box in your Zoom control panel. If your question is not answered immediately, it will be addressed at the end of the webinar during the question and answer portion of the presentation. And finally, on June 12th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we will be holding our next webinar, Virtual Containers, ITAM Best Practices and Licensing Considerations. I will post the registration link to that webinar in the chat box. That's all we have for announcements. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Avinash and he'll get us started.
My name is Avinash and I am the director here at AnglePoint, working on cybersecurity as well as software asset management. I've been working in this industry for about 10 plus years now, with focus on both IT security, helping our clients in terms of data privacy, data security, identity access management, and also in areas of software asset management, which include, of course, IT asset management and then parts of cybersecurity as well. I am joined here by my colleagues, Rohit and Danielle. Rohit has been working in the IT industry as well, in the security and compliance space for about 10 plus years. He leads our security operations day to day, working with our clients on their requests around security, compliance, frameworks, and other aspects of security. Daniel, who works on our team as well, has 4+ years of experience in security field. He obviously has been working in security industry with different companies and joined us about 2 years back. He holds a master's degree in information security as well for Carnegie Mellon, has been working with us on our various security initiatives for the last year and a half or two as well. Before we get started, we want to talk about our background of our AnglePoint, what we do and where we come from. Basically, AnglePoint is a global services company focusing on software asset management and IT security, helping our clients in areas of compliance, tooling, and other things. We are globally based with our HQ in Santa Clara, California, and of course, we've got delivery centers across the U.S. with Utah being one of the biggest delivery center, and we have some offices out in Europe, which includes London and Germany, and also in Asia, including Australia, India, and Japan. To give you a little bit of old background, I want to spend quick 2 to 3 minutes if possible on our specialties. We definitely offer our clients various services, as we mentioned earlier, around SAM program management, cybersecurity, software publishing in terms of licensing, and SAM managed services. So in SAM program, really AnglePoint is focused on end-to-end helping our customers in terms of onboarding of hardware, software, in terms and retiring as well, and through the life cycle. So we really take our customer through the journey and help them understand the whole idea of SAM program management. In cybersecurity, we play a lot in the space of compliance with frameworks, do a lot of work in identity access management in terms of BCP, DR, cloud security. We have teams working in different aspects and helping our clients in this space. Software publishing is one of our other fortes as well. We do have specialized teams working on different software vendors, whether it's IBM, Microsoft, Oracle, or Salesforce. We really try to help our customers get arms around the licensing and help them really grow in that direction the right way. And of course, that's coupled towards together as a SAM managed services as well, whether that includes, understanding your usage of your publisher or understanding your SAM program management, or also helping from a cybersecurity aspect as well. So overall, Anglepoint is offering services in these areas, and hence, cybersecurity and SAM kind of go hand in hand for us very much with all of our clients. That's with our kind of services overall. So for coming to today's topic, our topic for today webinar is focused on really merging IT security and SAM together, because for us, that's really our day-to-day work we've been doing with our clients and customers globally. So just kind of the flow of the webinar over here. We want to look at some of these cyber attacks, which has happened in the last year or two. I'm sure a lot of these are probably familiar when they come up on the screen on your side. We want to start with our focus on Equifax, which is, in the last 2 years has been one of the biggest hacks. Obviously, there had been some more as well, but Equifax kind of had that ripple effect in terms of industry and how really data security is being managed. We're then going to start focusing into cybersecurity and IT together. We're going to talk about that. Rohit will walk us that a little bit and help us understand how these go hand in hand together. And then in the end, I'll come back in and talk about some of the approach of ITAM, which we've been developing, and some of the methodologies which we have been working on with our clients as well. So moving on, cyber attacks, we know have been happening quite a lot on and off. I think the latest, I'm sure probably on the call, everybody must have heard about the Quest diagnostic breach, which happened yesterday. Again, tens of thousands of data lost, personal information lost as well. But on the screen, we've got some of these other breaches which has happened as said in 2 years. Equifax, one of the biggest one due to a vulnerability, which we will talk about it in our next slides, which Daniel will take over. But Equifax was a big one. We had a breach with Uber as well, where again, there was a GitHub repository lying out there, and the login credentials were probably very easy to get into, and that obviously caused a lot of breach in terms of data as well. Marriott had a breach as well in the last 6 months. Again, the issue was similar, where the attackers were able to get into a system and steal a lot of personal information, which has been happening quite on and off now, and very, very much prevalent as a part of our day-to-day activities in terms of IT. If you are obviously in that space, ransomware has been one of the ongoing attacks always. We've got City of Atlanta. We got attacked last year, and it kind of took them about 17 million to really build back everything, rather than obviously, the attackers had demanded about $51,000 in Bitcoins, which obviously was not the best thing to do as well. So again, ransomware got into the systems of City of Atlanta and was able to take over them as well, which obviously was a big issue, and the entire utilities and facilities of Atlanta came down because of that. City of Baltimore also got attacked recently. I think they're probably in trying to fix it up as we are speaking. And again, the issue was same thing. Ransomware, which got into the system, and the attackers are demanding for Bitcoins, which is causing the problem. So I think, it's being a consistent theme now with obviously the most recently Quest diagnostics, which happened yesterday. Attacks have become very frequent in terms of IT security, and most of these point towards the fact that there was a system lying out there which was weak in password, and there were no password regulations in that, or nobody knew about that system because it was a shadow IT system lying out there, which nobody could really figure out in the environment. So I think, we're trying to see a consistent theme, what's happening. In some cases, obviously, it's more and more direct, which we'll talk about it using the Equifax example. But in some cases, of course, it's if not direct, there are indirect effects, which could be fixed with the help of what we believe a much more good understanding of IT asset management and cybersecurity team working together. Having said that, let's dive on to our next slide when I'll bring Dan, our technical expert, to talk a little bit about our Equifax breach, which we will talk about a little bit before we dive into some of the aspects of security and IT asset management. Dan?
All right. Thanks, Avinash. So I'll go into a little more detail about the Equifax breach, including how the events unfolded and how the attack happened and some findings related to that breach. First, though, I want to say we aren't trying to pick on Equifax here. This was just one of the largest data breaches in history, and it has subsequently been analyzed and reported on a lot. And all of the data surrounding this makes it a good case study for a lot of topics like the one we've chosen today. So you can see on the timeline here, the first event to happen was that Apache was notified of a vulnerability in Struts. This vulnerability was responsibly disclosed in order to give Apache time to develop a patch for it. The vulnerability itself allowed for remote code execution when an invalid content type packet was sent to the server. A vulnerability allowing for remote code execution is about as bad as it gets because it can give the attacker full control over the system. So Apache responded appropriately and released a patch within a few weeks. Of course, releasing a patch pretty much means the same thing as publicly announcing a vulnerability. It's like a starting bell for a race between attackers and defenders. So the attackers will reverse engineer the patch, develop an exploit, and then find a target to use that exploit against. And this, of course, doesn't all have to be done by the same party. Lots of different people can contribute to that. And then on the other hand, defenders need to identify the vulnerability in their systems, acquire and test the patch, apply the patch, and then verify that everything still works. So the patch was released by Apache on March 6th, and almost simultaneously, proof of concept exploits were publicly available in places like ExploitDB. So that race was on, and on May 14th, Equifax was exploited and the breach began. The breach continued until the very end of July when Equifax identified the vulnerability and patched it. So you can see on the timeline here that Equifax had a little over 2 months to secure themselves, and that attackers had a little over 2 months as well to have access to Equifax. In all, it took nearly 5 months for Equifax to identify the vulnerability and get it patched. And you can see on the right some of the effects of the breach. So the amount of consumer data compromised is pretty astounding, especially since this was sensitive data and not just usernames and passwords. It's also being touted as the costliest breach, well over $1 billion already. And the downgrade from a stable outlook to a negative outlook by Moody's is actually a pretty recent event, just a couple weeks ago. Moody's said this is the first time a cybersecurity event led them to changing an outlook for a company. And this is happening nearly 2 years after the incident. So you can see how impactful this breach was on them. So now we'll move on to how the attack happened. If you could go to the next slide. So this is just a high-level view of how the attack was carried out. Equifax likely wasn't targeted, but was found through mass scanning of web servers. However, I'm sure when attackers realized that they had an Equifax server, they made it a priority to exploit them. So the vulnerability was actually in their online dispute portal. From there, the attackers found unencrypted usernames and passwords that allowed them to access additional databases. These databases contained personally identifiable information, which was slowly extracted until the attackers were discovered a few months later. So we'll go to the next slide. We'll talk about why only Equifax. The United States Senate's Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs released a report in March of this year regarding the Equifax breach. If you're interested in the details of this breach, it actually is quite a good place to get an overview of what happened. So the report contains 18 findings of fact, and I've highlighted 4 of those that relate to our topic today about IT asset management and security. So the first one, finding number 3, Equifax did not have a comprehensive IT asset inventory. This led to ineffective vulnerability scanning and no way to determine if Equifax used Apache Struts, and if they did, then where they used it. The second one is finding 8. Equifax had a policy in place regarding the timeline for patch installation. Critical patches were supposed to be installed within 48 hours. Since it was unable to detect the vulnerable version of Struts because there was no IT asset inventory, it took months to patch, as we just saw in the timeline. And had they been able to go straight to the affected server, they likely could have met that internal timeline for patching. The next one is finding number 12. Equifax did, in fact, scan for the vulnerability, the specific Apache Struts vulnerability, but since they didn't understand their IT environment well, they were unable to scan the network appropriately, and the vulnerability went undiscovered. I think this is a particularly interesting finding, as it is one thing to know if you are vulnerable, but it is another to conduct the appropriate actions and assure yourself incorrectly that you are safe. And then the last one I want to highlight is finding 17, which is also pretty significant. It says that the other credit reporting agencies were in the same place at the start of the timeline I showed earlier. However, the report attributes an updated IT asset inventory as a major reason that TransUnion and Experian were able to identify the vulnerability in their applications and patch them in a timely manner. So I think that comparison is pretty striking and particularly unfavorable for Equifax compared to their competitors. So here are a couple more excerpts from that report. The second quote here mentions that the criticality of assets was not considered when patching. This isn't too surprising given the lack of an inventory that would have that information, but not even having that as a standard practice shows a lack of risk-based thinking at Equifax when it comes to security. And then finally at the bottom, you can see that TransUnion and Experian were both lauded for their current IT asset inventories and their ability to follow through with the policies that they had, and based on that information, patch appropriately. So now I'll just pass it over to Rohit to talk more about the IT asset management specifically.
Hey, thank you, Daniel. Thanks. So one of the things that we see when we are working with customers, like when they first want to integrate IT assets management, they consider IT assets management as a kind of a different vertical. But what we see the best practice is they should integrate IT assets management into their existing IT strategy or the governance process, like any other change management, access management, or any other business process or the governing process that they follow. Shouldn't be treated like this is something sitting either in the vendor management side or as an independent vertical. So to begin with, like what is actually IT assets? What contributes to IT assets? So we have taken an example from ISO standard ISO 19770. And just to mention here, our company CEO Ron Brill also he's a chairman for 19701, and currently working on integrating ISO 19700 and ISO 27001. ISO 27001 is about information security, and ISO 19770 is about IT assets management. So you can see on the left side, these are all the assets that you can imagine in your environment, except human capital. So all the things that you can imagine in your environment that could impact your, that touches your digital or enterprise environment, they call us like, they fall into that IT assets management. It could be physical servers, could be your cloud applications, or any kind of a software or application installed on them. And assets management system is basically, it's a complete end-to-end management of your assets. So first thing that you need is policy and governance around that, where you can manage your configuration and not only managing it, but understanding like if there are any changes or any recent thing happens that should be reflected in your assets. And assets basically is anything that is your into your IT environment. It is your local laptop, your servers, your networking switches, routers, or any other equipment, or mobile devices or handheld devices that you're using, scanners, or any of the cloud applications, because these are the endpoints where exploits exist. And if we don't have clear picture about our overall endpoints, you cannot secure them. Like it's probably a cliche statement, like you cannot secure what you don't know. But it's still valid and true. Like if we take example of Equifax, like if they have known their all endpoints and they knew like where the vulnerability is, it would have been probably far more easier for them to identify and patch it. And in the cases of other credit agencies, they did a good job with identifying the vulnerabilities and managing their assets, and that's like saved them. And other key thing is that constitutes assets management system is the collection of data, basically discovery of all your hardware, software, applications, and the current versions, and what is their configuration is, and their locations, and as well as if they are cloud or on-premise base. And essentially, it's the reporting part is key important part, because many of the times if we consider like even a small organization, they have like thousands or hundreds of thousands of endpoints. If we don't have like proper reporting system where I can identify these are my high risk areas or these are low risk areas, it's very, very kind of a huge task to go through all the details. So reporting and proper visualization is key part. So when and this is actually the content of this slide is coming from basically taken from ISO 19770, where IT assets is considered as a base for all other, you can say, your areas within your IT organization. Because IT assets management has key information about your IT assets. It has inventory, like where you can find the location and is it currently active, inactive, and everything that's related to your IT assets. Now, if we consider all other business area, financial management system, they want to know like, okay, how much assets that I have, how much depreciation that I can claim, or basically planning for like future spends. Procurement is a key stakeholder for knowing about what your current IT or software assets looks like. Planning for future purchases or license compliance for existing software assets, it's pretty much goes into that. And IT and cybersecurity, it's like we have seen from Equifax or recent other attacks. Cybersecurity and IT assets, they go hand in hand. Like in any of the environment where you want to make sure like your environment, IT environment is secure, you need to know all the endpoints. Business continuity planning, disaster recovery, or anything, you need to first understand your key IT assets. Like if you want to plan for a failover or switchover or any kind of business continuity. IT architecture definitely has like all the information that you want to present about your enterprise IT, and without IT inventory, it is hard to understand that. Configuration management, and again, I'm taking these as an example. There are other business processes that touches IT inventory, and I will say like most of the business processes or the processes, they need IT assets inventory information. So this is on the top right-hand corner, if you can see, there are a couple of quotes, and these quotes are from Gartner. And it's really like kind of stressing that idea. in the future, we will need IT asset management as a kind of a key driver for cybersecurity. And so the question that we are oftenly asked, like, okay, what is the standard? How can we integrate IT assets management into our overall IT governance? So, and again, this is, I don't want to like stress on like you have to use these standards or frameworks for environment, but just giving you an idea, like there are certain standards and frameworks existing in market that can be used. NIST has published 1805. That gives a very comprehensive idea about how you should be managing your IT assets. And like I mentioned, 19,770 ISO standard is very much dedicated to IT assets management. So these two frameworks are kind of a gold standard for IT assets management, and primarily considered any kind of like, if any organization want to build their IT assets management program from beginning, they can consider these programs. But essentially, you don't have to rely on these two. There are other two, not other two, like there, if you pick any of the critical information security or assets or compliance standard, HIPAA 27001, CSA, or FISMA related, they talk about IT assets management. They don't either go into too much details, but they still have that component that can be used to secure your assets. And not only like securing it, it's a more kind of understanding your assets and planning toward how you should prepare your plan.
Yeah. Right. This is great, and this is very relevant to one of the questions which we have been now posted in our chat channel. So the question says, how do you convince organizations to move ITAM into the IT mainstream and out of purchasing and accounting functions where most reside now? And it's a very apt question as we're talking about the last two slides. So I do want to answer that, and then I can give my take as well on this.
Sure. So thanks for asking that question. I think in these two slides, like I will be like talking about actually what's in the question. So IT assets management, basically, if you look at it, it's a inventory of assets, the license, version, and life cycle. IT security, on the other hand, is basically talking about like policies, procedures, risk management, vulnerability, and patch. Now, what happens is, like, if we don't integrate IT assets management into overall IT governance program, there will be limited visibility. Like, for instance, somebody sitting on IT operation will not know about how many assets are there in a whole organization. They will be focusing only on their portion. And even within their portion, they will be like looking at the critical assets. And if there are any security gaps, if you don't know about those assets, there's no way you can patch or manage those security gaps. Essentially, it's a redundant effort because teams will be working in silos, and probably there will be like if you're using any kind of a tools or application, there will be like redundant tools and application that's providing same set of information. And if they work in together, so basically consider like a one platform or one governance program that integrates into IT security or your overall IT management. It gives you end-to-end holistic view of your total IT assets within your organization. And also like as well as all the security vulnerabilities, or like what is your current security posture is. So essentially, when you look at this, like if somebody asks me like, how can we convince our management, like we need to integrate IT assets management into as a part of our IT mainstream, I will say like, consider like, if you don't do it, what are the downsides? The downsides are like, you are essentially spending a lot more than actually you will be like if you integrate it into your IT mainstream. Because if it is under a vendor or financial management, they are looking at it more from license compliance. and more for renewals and any kind of future spending. Now, information security or IT assets management or considered like CIO of organization, they want to manage or like plan for future roadmap. They will be essentially looking for the same kind of information. And if they both work in silos, they will be spending first like essential amount of budget on both and essentially producing the same kind of results. And there are always like chances, there are gaps like where IT assets management, they have information about certain assets which are probably no longer in support or no longer used, but they are not visible to on IT mainstream because they are no longer in support or operation. And
so just kind of adding on to what Rohit said earlier, right? I think one of the questions was about how to convince organizations to move ITAM into IT mainstream. That's a very great question, and kind of adding on to what Rohit said. I think it's important to have obviously that C-level visibility coming into both these functions. We often see these are as we know in different areas. Sometimes it's sitting in the procurement side, sometimes it's probably sitting in the finance side for various reasons. But having that C-level buy-in and using the resources at hand, talking about visibility of assets into IT security is the key driver to really merge this together and move into mainstream. It's definitely a good point that as of now, probably it's not as mainstream as we all would want it to be, but I think our customers, as we see every day, are getting more and more very much understanding about all these aspects which needs to be merged together. I think the important thing is to have the C-level buy-in to merge these together in terms of and making sure security also leverages IT asset management to a large extent. It should not just be a function of a periodic asset inventory request coming out from security to the IT asset management team, but we believe the teams should work together in tandem day in and day out, because IT asset management holds the information about security patches, what's live in the environment as of last month maybe, or as of last scan which they did. And it's important to feed that data into security and merge it together. Again, that's kind of very relevant to our next two slides here. We also see a question about how organizations actually should manage the cloud assets, including shadow IT applications in use across the organization. Any recommendations for visibility and prioritizing based on criticality? That's a very great question, actually. We have two slides picking up two examples, exactly talking about this a little bit, not completely though, and I'll touch on that. But the idea is, if you see on this particular slide now, security and patch management. I think one of the biggest issues at Equifax was, which Daniel pointed out earlier, not complete visibility of all the environment and where the patches need to be applied. This is very relevant in our day-to-day customer environment where we work with. There are often tons of patches released by every different vendor, every different publisher, and it's important to track and update based on what really is required. Of course, right, security team gets those updates, but security team gets an update and they would only implement in areas where they know that the asset is there. But the asset management team would actually have a complete know-how. So it's important to kind of, work together and implement these more as they come together. Also, if you see the next slide, we talk about use of shadow IT. So one of the important aspects of having a very good IT asset management is you have the right tools in place, you have the right process in place. You're able to focus on capturing all the assets in your environment, including trying to run across your cloud as well. Obviously, there are tools out there which measure your cloud usage and also how secure you're on the cloud. So it's important to merge that data as a part of IT asset management into your security aspect. So definitely, shadow IT is an important issue, which not only asset is an unauthorized asset, but also it's an unauthorized software which should not be running an environment, and it probably is running a software which is an older version because it's not been updated. So that's an issue right away off the bat for any IT security team, C-level person, which can cause an issues to really, to worry about it. You got to merge these together more and more and try to get one data set to the security team working together in tandem with IT asset management team and making sure that they are talking and implementing those aspects. So those are kind of we just picked up 2 examples, but there are obviously a lot of examples of merging this together. But these 2 are really key benefits and very relevant to the topic we're talking about in terms of Equifax over here, which is very important. You want to move to the next slide. So in terms of going back to a quick question before, in terms of prioritizing, in terms of visibility based on criticality, every IT environment is critical based on the business needs. If obviously you have a big cloud presence, it's important to understand your cloud environment and make sure that you leverage your IT asset management team in terms of securing the data on the cloud. But shadow IT is a big problem with a lot of organizations, especially if you're part of a big organization where you are trying to capture everything in the environment globally. So running that information across all the tools is important. But having said that, we've got a couple of 2 slides on about really what we believe should be an approach to ITAM and security. This is what we've been working with a lot of our customers, and we've been trying to make sure we integrate these 2 both together for our customers in terms of how they should really look at it. It's important in terms of ownership, of course, right? Throughout the slides, we've been talking about how security team and SAM team or IT asset management team have to understand their ownership. They have to work together, but of course, ownership is important to understand what needs to be exchanged in terms of information. From a security perspective, obviously, you have to perform a risk assessment, right? Which is a basic step of every organization. You've got to understand what where your assets are, what risks you can really looking at, and other things from an aspect of making sure you're ready for that. Develop the right policies, controls in place. Whether you talk about IT asset management, talk about IT security, the frameworks, whether it's 27001, NIST, HIPAA, any other framework you take, all speak about having security and IT asset management processes and policies in place in terms of how you're tracking it and how you're doing that. Having the right applications and tools, right? If you're using a GRC tool, then using that in terms of security and compliance is important. If you're using any kind of asset management tool, whether it's ILMT, Flexera, Snow, it's important to keep them updated and really connecting it to your maximum amount as much as possible, and making sure you get that.
Yeah, and again, this is not like a cooked recipe that we want to feed as a part of a presentation, but wanted to give you a high-level overview, what a simplistic approach that you can take in your organization. Like Avinash mentioned, ownership. There should be people responsible for making sure that there is a IT assets management program in place and it's run as per the organization management. Risk. You cannot have 100% compliance or 100% visibility. So you need to understand where our risks are, and then come up with appropriate policies and controls. For instance, if you're medical compliance or you deal with people's medical history, then your biggest risk is HIPAA compliance, as well as any assets that are touching the HIPAA related data. And if you are dealing with payment information, you need to identify all your assets, where your data flows, and make sure you have right policies and controls in place and procedures to make sure that data is appropriately secured. Tools and application is first you have that your policies and processes and risk identified, then you can think about what are the appropriate tools that you will need in your organization. We are not recommending any one or other tool or you must have tool, but like in larger organizations, it's very hard to manually perform these kind of activities or collaborate the data. And essentially, like the final step is operationalizing it. Having all these tools and applications and the process and procedures is good part, but unless until like you have not operationalize it, like there's no regular monitoring or reporting to right stake owners, and it is not going to help. And training is also like key part, like could be like considered training and reporting can be considered as a part of one control, but make sure there are programs where you are training your IT administrators, security administrator, or all the relevant parties, the key value, like why you need assets management program and how they can securely manage their assets.
Right. Great point, Rohit. I guess moving on, we have the last slide, which we're talking about really high level. This kind of ties back into our previous slide, where AnglePoint has been, as we mentioned earlier, working with our clients and with our customers, really helping them in the area of security and SAM working together, really developing the exact steps which we spoke about earlier in terms of risk assessment, designing a governance program which kind of fits their needs, as Rohit mentioned, whether it's based on HIPAA, whether it's based on PCI, or even kind of the basic ISO 27001, which is important from a basic perspective before you even get into specific areas. And then, again, right, tools is a good to have always, but it's not the end of the game, right? Tools are as only good as what they can do, but there's always a requirement of human intervention. And obviously with that, the tools help you to kind of work on the management reporting aspect. So it's important from a cybersecurity perspective, IT asset perspective, really developing a program which works cohesively together and, driving information against each other and just not working in silos. Kind of that's the key message we want to drive in this webinar over here. At this point, I think we'll move it and we'll open up for any questions. The question session, you can type all your questions in there. We got wonderful 2 questions coming in. Hopefully, we can a few more if we can get to in our question session here. That'll be great. We've got about 15 minutes left. As we're waiting for questions, a couple of quick announcements. We are, as mentioned earlier in the call, we are recording this, so this recording will be available soon after this presentation is over, and that will be posted out through our channels. We also have a virtual container webinar coming up on June 12th, which is about a week or so from today, and we hope to have you there as well on our webinar. Having said that, we've got a couple of questions coming more, so we'll try to answer them in the time we have. So first question says, Equifax may have thought that they were doing an acceptable job with their IT asset management program. How can we know, or how can I know in my day-to-day operations if my organization is good enough, or at least doing a good enough job in the IT asset management program? I think since Dan, do you want to take up this question? Since it's specifically Equifax, I would love to have you answer this question if you can.
Yeah, sure. So I guess this is kind of a classic risk management question, right? How to manage the unknown unknowns. So I think if someone had a straightforward answer, that would really help a lot of people, but I'm not sure there is. So I think the best thing is just to gain more and more knowledge about your environment, about your organization. And it doesn't always have to be knowledge that you have, but like knowledge that you have access to. So maybe some questions you could ask yourself are, am I communicating with all the teams all the way down the row to the, to the end of the, to the lowest person on the ladder? Or are we involving others outside of our team to validate the data that we have in our inventory system? Or are we trusting ourselves too much? I think Equifax actually demonstrated this, that part of their problem was they had poor communication patterns between some of their teams. And that was another finding in that report, was that if they had communicated effectively, they might have also been able to patch that. So I think gaining that knowledge and doing that through good communication among all your teams, like Rohit talked earlier, IT asset management needs to be integrated, so it's not just a silo of data, but it can be used by the security team and everyone else.
Great. Thanks for answering that, Dan. So one other question which we've got is, how do you see security frameworks like ISO, NIST, and others making really IT asset management part of security and compliance? I think we did speak about that. Rohit, maybe you want to answer that question. We did speak about that a little bit, and I think it's I think more and more security frameworks are including IT asset elements as a part of it. So, Rohit, do you want to answer that more?
Yeah, I mean, if I go back to that slide real quick, so like if all these standards that you see here, they have a couple of IT asset management related controls. So it's not idea like you specifically follow those controls if they are not relevant to you. Just understanding like from risk side and what's your business objective. For instance, like you want to achieve any ISO 27001 certification, then you must comply those IT assets management requirements. I think it's 8.8.1.1. And essentially, if you talk about when we talk about larger governance risk compliance program, like for the larger organizations, they actually reuse the compliance requirement from one compliance standard to another one. So like in a typical organization, if you go, there will be like a mapping of controls from one framework to another. And when you talk about IT assets management, like when you follow one standard, essentially you will be also following requirements for other standards as well.
So that's great. So I think we're really seeing more and more of these frameworks coming together and talking about IT asset management as an important element of security, which is great, which is the key, which everybody needs to understand more and more. So thanks for that, Rohit. We have another great question coming through. So the question says, what is the impact, if any, of IoT and the proliferation of web-enabled devices, which often are not as secureable as standard IT devices? Does the extension of the edges of the IT environment into IoT compound these problems? And how can we protect organizations from this? I think this is a really super great question. Thank you for posing this. I'll probably give my take on it, and Rohit, if you want to continue that. Definitely, this is a growing problem, right? IoT devices is an upcoming area in the last 8 to 10 years. We see the extension of edges going around into refrigerators, into cars, and obviously the home devices which are coming in. And this adds to the problem of security. Often even organizations are prone to this, and this will get even more and more, I would say, a part of the problem with the increase in, obviously using autonomous cars and so on and so forth, which is obviously a part of extension of all the devices. From my point of view, definitely it's a growing area of concern, problem, and I think as cybersecurity professionals, as IT asset professionals, this just increases the risk and increases the area as to how we need to focus on. So there's a huge impact of this definitely on aspect of how you track these assets and how you secure these assets. It's definitely not as easy to secure, an environment, an asset which is in your own environment, as opposed to, what's out there. But I think it's important, again, track them and, implement them. If you have a refrigerator, which is, obviously software based, then tracking that and making sure you have the right kind of software running on the vulnerabilities fixed on that is important. So it is an evolving industry, and I think it's definitely going to see how this are going to have more ramifications in terms of tracking it and making it more secure as well.
Just to add to that, I think a couple of years back or sometime back, there was a Target data breach in the Target stores. So breach happened from a HVAC AC controller system. So essentially, like IoT devices or any kind of a devices that integrate with your information security system or your IT systems, they increase your risk by, I think they, like explore the risk. But essentially, like this, it's not like that's a scary monster that's we cannot see or we cannot manage. What we need to do is we need to come up with a proper strategy and proper controls in a place. So if we like going back to this slide, risk assessment is important part. When you know, like my business is expanding and I will be like going into the that business scenarios or enterprise management systems where I will be integrating with IoTs or any kind of a web-enabled or any new kind of a endpoints. We need to include those as a part of our risk assessment program. Risk assessment, it shouldn't be like just the financial risk, but it should also include any kind of a security vulnerability risk. And if the risk is like, for instance, if I have a supply chain management system where I'm integrating, for instance, cell phones, like if I go to Walmart, nowadays they use a handheld scanner to check out or like to check inventory or to scan the barcodes, or even recently I saw you can like pay with those handheld cell phones. So basically, look, what if I am going to like manage that problem? First thing I need to understand like what data is going through that IoT device. In a Walmart case, it is like my payment information is going, my credit card information is going, my email address is going. So definitely that is a high risk area. And then there should be corresponding controls in place, policies and controls in a place where all the handheld devices or any kind of endpoints, they should be registered and properly managed from security perspective. It might need an additional tool or application to manage them. I think like for those any kind of devices, there are always some tools and application where they can be used to monitor these devices. And ultimately, there should be a kind of a training process or the learning curve that goes with those new handheld devices, where you not only teaching management, but also like all the IT administrator who will be dealing with those technologies, as well as how you can always keep yourself up to date with the new versions of softwares or any kind of things that are applicable to those IoT devices.
Perfect, right. No, thanks for going into a little bit details over there. I think we have time for one last question. So the question has come in, says, should IT asset management become part of a regular internal and external security audit requirements for every organization?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is going back to that same slide. So it doesn't have to become, this is already a part of your compliance requirements. For instance, if I go to PCI, there is a 2.4, I think that there's a subsection 2.4 that talks about this, and ISO 27001 has requirements. And if you go for like CSA certification, all of them already have. It's not something that's new. It's like how you are managing it, and how you're focusing. It's something that we need to really focus. Like if any of those like compliance standard, they have a BCP, business continuity planning. Unless until you know your assets, like where I have to secure those assets or should be recovered after any disaster, you cannot recover them, and that should be part of your audit or checks or internal or external or any kind of checks that you perform. Right.
No, great point, Rohit. I think and thank you for all those questions. I think it's really important again to drive the message that ITAM and security really cannot sit together. I think we see them going in the market together with every organization, and that should be kind of the go-to kind of strategy for every C-level person, every team who are working together. And in some cases, we understand that maybe cybersecurity has an upper hand and ITAM may not have such visibility, but it's important to drive that message through cybersecurity that ITAM is a part of cybersecurity, and it's just not a procurement or a financial requirement, which will obviously drive the message more, and obviously more visibility in terms of whether it's funding or whether in terms of even visibility as a part of security program. But this is kind of the idea which we wanted to kind of discuss at this point in time. I think we are almost at the end of the time over here, and we believe we have answered all the questions on the panel as well over here. Thank you, everybody who was able to join the webinar. We will be posting the recording soon, so please watch out for our channels. And feel free to reach out to us anytime. You will have our contact details shortly as well for any questions or any follow-ups on the webinar as well, any future requirements. Thanks again. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.